What if a single move on the Baltic Sea could ignite a geopolitical powder keg? Estonia and the United Kingdom have pushed to inspect Russian merchant ships sailing through these strategic waters. In a sharp response, Russia unleashed a formidable naval force, 120 warships now patrolling the sea, sending a clear message: Moscow is ready to defend its interests with unwavering strength. But what does this escalation mean for peace in the region? Earlier efforts by Estonia to intensify tensions with Russia have taken a new turn. Inside Tallinn, officials debate establishing an adjacent zone in the Gulf of Finland, a maritime belt meant to extend Estonia's control beyond its current territorial waters. Ostensibly, this zone would allow Estonia to monitor and regulate vessels passing close to its shores. Yet, according to international law, Estonia has no right to block Russia's maritime routes. Still, Moscow is not taking this lightly. Officials warned that protective measures might be enacted soon to counter such provocations. Dmitry Peskov, the Russian presidential spokesperson, emphasized Russia's expectation for enforcement of international maritime laws and the preservation of freedom of navigation in the Gulf. Despite these declarations, Estonia is pushing forward with plans to impose the new zone, potentially adding hurdles for Russian ships traversing these waters. Estonia's foreign minister, Urmas Salu, disclosed that the government has been tasked with drawing up a strategy to introduce this adjacent zone, spanning an ambitious 24 nautical miles from its coast. His justification? Strengthening national security, preserving the environment, and protecting historic coastal sites. Just last week, Kristi Laanet from Estonia's foreign ministry revealed that this new zone would give Tallinn sweeping authority to enforce customs and tax regulations, immigration controls, health inspections, plus safeguarding archaeological relics. Notably, military ships of other countries and non-commercial vessels would be exempt from these inspections. However, if implemented, Estonia would gain the power to board and examine Russian vessels leaving ports in the Leningrad region and Kronstadt. Over time, this could choke the flow of Russian traffic through the Gulf of Finland, escalating tensions to dangerous levels. International law sets clear limits: adjacent zones cannot stretch beyond 12 miles past a country's baseline territorial waters. In cramped waterways like the Gulf, where neighboring shores of Estonia and Finland lie just 3 miles apart, unilateral expansions are legally questionable. Finland's stance now becomes crucial. Will Helsinki support these moves, risking conflict, or opt for diplomacy? The fate of Russian navigation hinges on this delicate balance. Meanwhile, as the diplomatic chess game unfolds, many wonder, how far will the Baltic tinderbox burn before the next spark ignites? What risks lie beneath the cold sea surface in this strategic corridor? The world watches, breath caught, as these small borders threaten to redraw power in Northern Europe. Previously, we saw how Estonia's plan to create a special maritime zone could grant it the power to inspect Russian vessels leaving ports in the Leningrad region and Kronstadt. This move threatens to choke the passage through the Gulf of Finland, setting the stage for serious obstacles to Russia's naval routes. Now, let's dive deeper into the legal and geopolitical storm brewing beneath these waters. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, an adjacent zone cannot extend beyond 12 nautical miles from the baseline used to measure territorial seas. But what happens when two country shores face each other across a narrow strait? Neither side can unilaterally stretch its jurisdiction without consent. In the Gulf of Finland, the international shipping lane between Estonia and Finland narrows to just 3 miles. Imagine a slender corridor where every inch becomes a battleground of influence. This razor-thin passage makes the future of Russian navigation there alarmingly fragile. The entire fate now hinges on Helsinki's stance. Will Finland side with Estonia's bold move or resist it to maintain balance? Estonia's push risks igniting fresh tensions across the Baltic Sea. Russia's response will be crucial, potentially redefining the region's delicate equilibrium. Freedom of navigation in the Gulf of Finland is not just a Moscow concern, it's a strategic flashpoint for all of Northern Europe. The ripple effects could redraw alliances and reshape power plays. Alexander Lott, a maritime law expert from the Norwegian Center for Maritime Law and a professor at Tartu University, explains that the adjacent zone is indeed a tool coastal countries can enforce domestically. Within this zone, a nation doesn't just watch, it can punish based on its own laws. Economic regulations, customs enforcement, taxation, health controls, even immigration policies come into play here. Why is Estonia so eager to wield such powers? One major reason is to tighten the net around sanction enforcement against Russia. By establishing this zone, Estonia aims to catch those trying to dodge restrictions and crack down on violators more effectively. This zone could also target vessels breaking customs or fiscal laws of the coastal state. Yet, Russia does not take this lightly. Moscow vehemently criticizes Estonia's initiative, viewing it as an aggressive overreach without legitimate international backing. The diplomatic temperature is rising fast. So, what will come next? Will Estonia's gamble provoke a new Baltic crisis or force negotiations that shift the rules of maritime engagement forever? The sea is restless, and the world is watching. In a world rife with geopolitical tension, Estonia's decision to create a contiguous zone in the Baltic Sea has transformed the regional landscape. This maneuver appears to be a bold attempt to assert its authority over critical shipping routes associated with Russia. However, the implications of this move have ignited a firestorm of controversy and resistance. Russian ambassador to Estonia, Vladimir Lipiev, asserts that local media has been inflating the severity of the situation, pursuing an agenda that heightens fears unnecessarily. He argues that such a contiguous zone does not grant Estonia the right to extend its sovereignty beyond internationally recognized boundaries. Russia's interests must be taken into account, he insists, particularly since its coastline directly borders Estonia in the Finnish Gulf. This assertion is supported by Dmitry Liskov, the spokesperson for the Kaliningrad regional government. Liskov describes the debate over Estonia's territorial claims as provocative. He notes that maritime transit through neutral waters in the Baltic is governed by international law, which cannot be unilaterally altered. Furthermore, he highlights that Kaliningrad houses the primary base of the Baltic fleet, implying that any limit on its movement would be imprudent, if not reckless. These tensions have escalated dramatically, as Estonia and Latvia have recently announced a significant downgrading of diplomatic relations with Moscow. The Russian ambassador has been ordered to leave Estonia by March 19. In retaliation for Tallinn's drastic reduction in the size of the Russian diplomatic mission, Moscow responded by expelling the Estonian ambassador, Markus Laid. As talks of tightening inspections on cargo transiting through Estonia begin to circulate, concerns rise about the impact this could have on the fragile economy of Kaliningrad. Member of the State Duma, Andrei Kolesnik, warns that rigorous inspections could severely disrupt essential supply chains for construction materials, food, and other cargo from St. Petersburg and other ports. With an average of 20 vessels traversing the Baltic each month, Kolesnik paints a vivid picture of the chaos that could ensue if Estonia were to impose stringent inspections on these ships. Imagine the sounds of the sea, the clash of waves against the hulls of cargo ships, waiting for hours to pass through a choke point. What if ships, laden with 4,000 tons of goods, are subjected to lengthy inspections? Could this lead to not only economic strain but also diplomatic faux pas, as accusations of illegal cargo arise? The stakes are rising, and the air thickens with uncertainty. How will Russia respond if these inspections put their supply lines at grave risk? As tensions run high, could we be on the brink of military escort missions in the Baltic? The world watches closely, waiting to see the next move in this precarious game of power and politics. What will happen when international law meets national ambition? The answer may redefine the balance of power in Northern Europe. Tensions have escalated significantly due to the strained relations between Estonia and Russia. The Estonian government has proposed a controversial initiative to create a so-called adjoining zone in the Gulf of Finland, which could severely restrict Russian maritime activities. This move raises the stakes in the already volatile geopolitical landscape of the Baltics, leaving the fate of both nations hanging in the balance. Currently, approximately 20 vessels navigate the Baltic Sea each month, carrying vital supplies like construction materials and food from St. Petersburg and nearby ports to Kaliningrad. Imagine the chaos if Estonian authorities begin to inspect these ships, each laden with 4,000 tons of goods. How long would those checks take? Potential provocations lurk in the shadows, with fears that illegal items could be planted during these inspections. Andrei Kolesnik, a member of the State Duma's Transport Committee, voiced urgent concerns about the catastrophic effects of such inspections on the already isolated Kaliningrad region. He recalled how the Baltic states previously blocked airspace for Russian carriers, forcing flights to take longer routes and driving up logistical costs, especially during winter. Kolesnik warned that these actions are just the beginning, a probing of Russian resolve. Should Moscow show any sign of weakness, a more stringent blockade could soon follow. In response to these threats, the Russian side may deploy military escorts for Baltic merchant vessels to safeguard their transit. "Our frigates are well suited for escorting these ships," he proclaimed, suggesting they could accompany the vessels with artillery, rather than missiles. He stressed that the military doctrine of Russia clearly states the country has the right to use force to normalize situations if external powers attempt to blockade any Russian region. In essence, a blockade of Kaliningrad could be perceived as an act of war. Kolesnik emphasized the need to monitor Estonia's initiative to create an adjoining zone, which could further limit Russian access to the Baltic Sea. Just think about the implications this could have. Would Russia tolerate such a provocation? As tensions mount, every move becomes a high-stakes game. Where will this lead? The intricate web of international relations in Northern Europe is on the precipice, with both sides poised for action. What will the next chapter of this unfolding saga reveal? The situation grows more dire, and all eyes are fixated on how these next moves will play out. The tension over Kaliningrad's fate has only deepened. The looming blockade threatens to become the spark that ignites open conflict. Lawmakers warn that cutting off Russia's access to the Baltic Sea crosses a red line, a potential cause for war. Central to this crisis is Estonia's bold proposal to establish a so-called adjacent zone, designed to restrict Russian naval movement in the Baltic. But what lies behind this daring maneuver? This idea first surfaced last summer, right after Finland's entry into NATO. Estonia suggested joint oversight of the Gulf of Finland, a move with seismic strategic implications. But Estonia didn't stop there. Its politicians even brought up the controversial demand for war reparations from Russia for the Soviet era. Moscow sees this as yet another pressure tactic disguised as diplomacy. From a legal standpoint, experts dismiss Estonia's adjacent zone as a provocation without solid grounding in international maritime law. Russia supporters argue that such proposals are pushed partly under the influence of powerful external actors, especially Washington. This delicate situation demands constant vigilance and readiness for whatever comes next. Kaliningrad remains at the epicenter of this geopolitical firestorm. Escalating tensions here risk sparking instability across the entire Baltic region and beyond. Yet, despite the explosive rhetoric, some say it's all aimed at grabbing headlines, not solving problems. This echoes the playbook of Urmas Reinsalu, Estonia's foreign minister, known for his fiery, populist style, a fact noted by political analyst Nazovic. Nazovic highlights that Estonia champions the most radical anti-Russian stance among the Baltic states. It doesn't just issue sharp criticisms but takes concrete actions directly threatening Moscow's interests, particularly the potential blockade of supplies to Kaliningrad. This isn't a mere political game, it's a move with real-world consequences. Interestingly, Finland has chosen a more cautious path. Though outwardly aligned with Western policy, Helsinki hesitates to fully embrace Estonia's aggressive approach. Inside Finland, debates continue over abandoning its neutral status. This internal uncertainty suggests Finland will likely avoid further inflaming tensions with Russia, at least for now. What happens if Estonia pushes ahead anyway? Can the Baltic Sea's fragile peace hold under such pressure? The answer may lie in how Russia responds, how Finland navigates its uncertain path, and whether cooler heads prevail amid rising regional drama. The stakes couldn't be higher. Finland's cautious stance contrasts sharply with Estonia's aggressive rhetoric. While Finland hesitates to abandon its neutral position, aware of the risks, Estonia pushes forward with plans that threaten to ignite a powder keg. What happens if Russia's ships en route to Kaliningrad are blocked? Such a move wouldn't just strain relations, it could spark a far-reaching conflict. Imagine naval convoys escorting every vessel through these once neutral waters, turning peaceful sea lanes into potential war zones. Estonia's NATO membership escalates the stakes immeasurably. Any clash involving its forces risks drawing the entire alliance into a confrontation few desire but all must prepare for. This persistent bravado from Tallinn exposes a dangerous disconnect within Western circles, a failure to grasp the fragile geography of power in the Baltic. Neutral waters, once safe harbors for commerce, edge closer to becoming battlegrounds, echoing dark historical chapters when piracy and privateering ruled the seas. Look and listen closely. The Baltic is no longer a mere trading route or cultural bridge, it's evolving into a theater of dominance and defiance. For Russia, these provocations strike at the heart of both its economy and its national security. The Finnish Gulf is a vital artery connecting St. Petersburg and the Leningrad region to the global market. Any artificial blockade here is not merely a regional irritation but a direct challenge, a red line in Moscow's eyes. Experts warn that the Baltic Sea is already heavily militarized. U.S. bases rise in Poland, NATO troops operate in Latvia and Lithuania. Finland's entry into the alliance shifts the balance further away from Russia. Against this backdrop, Estonia's bid to create an adjacent maritime zone isn't a standalone move. It forms part of a broader strategy to isolate and pressure Moscow. All eyes fixate on Kaliningrad, the exclave encircled by NATO members and vulnerable to supply chain disruptions. The situation teeters on a knife's edge. Will Estonia's provocations push the region into deeper crisis, or can cooler heads prevail before the drums of conflict drown out reason? The next moves will reveal the true cost of this escalating Baltic standoff. The recent geopolitical tensions surrounding maritime operations in the Baltic Sea have heightened significantly as Estonia and the United Kingdom consider inspecting Russian cargo vessels. This move provoked a serious response from Russia, with the Russian Navy deploying 120 combat units, signaling a robust readiness to defend its maritime interests. But what lies beneath this political posturing? Are we witnessing the early stages of a larger, more severe conflict? In Tallinn, Estonia, there is a proposal under consideration to establish a contiguous zone in the Gulf of Finland, expanding its territorial waters. However, according to international law, such an action cannot unilaterally block Russian maritime routes. The audacity of Estonia's proposal may seem reckless, but could it be a calculated risk to challenge Russia directly? As tensions rise, President Vladimir Putin's spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, has emphasized Moscow's commitment to uphold international maritime law and ensure freedom of navigation in the Gulf of Finland. Yet, Estonia remains unyielding. The Estonian Foreign Minister, Urmas Reinsalu, is advocating for a 24 nautical mile contiguous zone to bolster national security and oversee environmental protections in its maritime territory. Is this merely a defensive measure, or a provocation that could ignite a clash? The implications are unavoidably significant. The strategy aims to enforce customs and immigration laws, all while conveniently excluding inspections of foreign military vessels. Should this zone be established, it could enable Estonia to scrutinize Russian vessels departing from the Leningrad region, posing a serious obstacle to Moscow's maritime operations in the Gulf. But therein lies the paradox of power. Estonia is aware that its territorial ambitions could escalate into a full-blown crisis. Internationally, there are serious ramifications to consider. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea forbids excessive claims of jurisdiction by coastal states, particularly when borders are so closely aligned as they are in the Baltic Sea. If Estonia pushes forward, the question remains, can Russia afford to let this pass without consequence? Yet, many analysts warn of the unpredictable fallout that could stem from attempted Russian inspections or interruptions. The stakes are high. A single encounter at sea could set off a chain reaction, a misjudged intercept could spiral into a crisis with significant political and military implications. Already, there are discussions within Russian military circles about the possibility of reintroducing the practice of escorting vessels through the Baltic, a tactic from the Cold War era that now seems to be considered necessary again. As tensions rise, questions loom large. What will happen if Russian vessels perceive increased Estonian scrutiny as a direct threat? The implications of a blockade or aggressive maritime enforcement could redefine not only regional dynamics but the broader landscape of European security. Interestingly, the position of Finland remains key in this unfolding drama. Recent developments indicate that while Helsinki may ally itself with NATO's broader strategies, there is profound hesitance from within. Finnish businesses, closely tied to Russian markets, exhibit reluctance to endorse policies that could have adverse implications for their economic welfare. As allies potentially waver, does this present an opportunity for Russia to exploit divisions among NATO partners? What unfolds next could reshape the balance of power in the Baltic region. Will Estonia's provocative initiative spur Russia to assert itself militarily, or will diplomacy still find a way to navigate this perilous situation? The answer remains tantalizingly in the balance as both sides contemplate their next moves. A geopolitical storm is brewing in the heart of Europe, marked by a tense showdown in the Baltic Sea. Estonia and the United Kingdom have pushed for increased scrutiny of Russian trade vessels, igniting a furious response from Russia. Picture the scene, the sun glinting off the surface of the Baltic, the air thick with anticipation as Russian warships, numbering 120 and brimming with might, are deployed. Are they ready for a confrontation? As tensions rise, a critical question lingers: what will happen to maritime freedom in the region? Estonia, undeterred, is considering a controversial proposal to create a contiguous zone in the Gulf of Finland. This move, however, raises significant legal questions. Does Estonia have the right to restrict Russian maritime routes? Dmitry Peskov, spokesperson for the Russian presidency, insists on adherence to international maritime law, asserting the necessity of freedom of navigation. Yet the Estonian government forges ahead, spurred by claims of national security and environmental protection. With talk of a 24 nautical mile zone, the atmosphere is charged with uncertainty. What could this mean for Russia's access to vital shipping lanes capable of altering the balance of power in the region? As discussions intensify, Estonian officials argue that enforcement measures will not extend to military ships or vessels used for non-commercial purposes. But imagine the chaos if this plan comes to fruition. If Russian ships, laden with goods from Leningrad and Kronstadt, are subjected to inspection? Could such actions spiral into hostility? Rising voices in Moscow warn that any disruptive measures may be met with military intervention. What happens when a nation feels backed into a corner with nowhere to retreat? The balance of power is precarious, and experts assert that mistakes may trigger a crisis the likes of which Europe has not seen in decades. Finland's stance in this escalating situation is particularly intriguing. While aligning outwardly with NATO interests, many Finns remain wary of further escalation, valuing their historical neutrality and fearing the repercussions of engaging directly with Russia. The ramifications of a blockade on Kaliningrad, Russia's jewel in the Baltic, could awaken a surge of patriotic fervor among Russians, demanding a staunch response. What if Finland opts to side with Estonia, reshaping alliances in the region? The deep-rooted ties between Finnish businesses and the Russian market complicate the narrative, as many in Finland oppose policies that might lead to self-inflicted economic harm. Meanwhile, the Russian Baltic fleet is fortified, undertaking exercises aimed at counteracting aggression and protecting trade convoys. Plans for upgrading military infrastructure in Kaliningrad showcase Moscow's determination to maintain dominant control. As political analysts suggest, Estonia has fashioned itself as a forward base for broader NATO strategies, fanning the flames of tension. Each maneuver, whether diplomatic expulsions or enhanced scrutiny of maritime routes, propels the situation closer to a breaking point without officially triggering war. This lingering threat of conflict continues to hover over the Baltic, a volatile situation where Russian and NATO interests intertwine perilously. Many have begun to label the waters of the Gulf of Finland a powder keg. The question remains, what unforeseen twist may arise next as each nation presses its agenda? The outcome hangs in the balance, demanding constant vigilance in this high-stakes geopolitical chess game. Tensions in the Baltic region are already simmering dangerously close to the edge. The tangled interests of Russia and NATO create a volatile mixture where a single misstep could ignite a wider conflict. Experts warn that the Finnish Gulf has become Europe's ticking time bomb. But beyond geopolitics, this crisis carries a deeply emotional weight within Russia itself. Pressure against Kaliningrad strikes a raw nerve across Russian society. This isolated region stands as a powerful symbol, Russia's foothold in the heart of Europe. Any attempt to block its access would unleash a surge of patriotic fervor demanding a firm, uncompromising response. The Kremlin knows this well. Weakness or concession is not an option. As the months ahead promise to turn the Baltic into one of the continent's most explosive zones, the stakes grow ever higher. Freedom of navigation in these cramped waters and broader European stability hinge on the choices made now. Yet, it seems Estonia is purposefully stoking the fire, provoking Russia with calculated moves under the watchful eyes of its Western allies. Is this a risky gamble or a masterstroke in a larger game? The world waits, breath held, for what happens next.